I'm here in a studio in, I think, Mount Cook. I'm not too sure where we are. In Wellington. It's a lovely suburb in Wellington. At the offices of Matrix. And I'm here today interviewing Dr. Barbara Oakley, who is in New Zealand, care of the excellent people at the New Zealand Initiative. And Barbara, most people want to talk to you about education, and because you are world-renowned in that area, and almost all of the interviews that I've seen you've done have been on the subject of education. But when I went looking for when I saw you in New Zealand, I said, what has she written? And you've written a book called Evil Genes. And I thought, this is exactly what I wanted. So I bought the book and I've read it. And we've been chatting about it beforehand. So thank you for making the time. I'm going to start with a story in your book told by forensic psychologist Reid Malloy. And it's about a story of a young boy. And the story goes, at 18 months, said the mother, it was as if a switch had gone off in him. He started showing tremendous rage, complete lack of remorse, and an almost complete lack of empathy. His first reaction when he would see an animal would be to kill it. He became extremely hurtful and vicious. Once he hanged a cat in the backyard and waited for his mother to come home to watch her reaction. She remembered seeing his pleasure at his horror and then imitating her horror back to her. In an earlier podcast, I asked one of my guests, Dr. Paul Wood, nature or nurture? And I think he kind of kicked for touch, as you did a bit earlier. But in this situation, we are dealing with nature, aren't we?
It's pretty clear. And by nature, what we might mean is either a genetic predisposition or a brain damage of some sort that occurred somewhere during birth, pre-birth, after birth, something like that.
So in this, because a big part of your book, so your book defines sociopaths, but also focuses very heavily on two characteristics, Machiavellianism and borderline personality disorder. So maybe just give a high level, what's the difference between a sociopath and somebody with borderline, between a sociopath and somebody with Machiavellianism or borderline personality disorder? How would you define the differences between those two?
Well, when I was working on this book, what I was really trying to do was just answer a simple question, which is, why was my sister so mean? And she wasn't mean in the sense of a psychopath. She wouldn't go out and kill puppies, I don't think. But the full title of the book is Evil Genes, Why Rome Fell, Hitler Rose, Enron Failed, and My Sister Stole My Mother's Boyfriend.
And she did.
She did. And she did a lot worse as well. And my poor parents really suffered a lot. And I wanted to know why this happened. What was going on? I mean, she wasn't an outright psychopath. She wasn't in prison or anything. She would just do really hurtful, nasty things to people who were her friends. So how do you go look up? I thought, hey, I'm a professor of engineering. I should be able to look up the science behind why people do this kind of thing. But you can't go.
Was she like that at 3? Was she similar to this child?
Very good question. At 3 is when she got polio. Mm-hmm. And as I explore through the book, polio can affect the reticular activating system. It's a sort of a network that underpins our ability to focus and maintain attention. So a lot of time during the 1940s, when she had polio, she was in that last cohort, there was a lot of research about how it affected your cognition. Nowadays, of course, there's no such set of publications because it's not really seen as something that should be looked at. But it's clear and profound that at least some of her cognitive abilities were strongly affected by the polio. She was in an iron lung for many months, and I think that was behind why she became what she became and why she would do some of the things she did.
Because you say that 40% of people who have polio are more likely to show borderline personality or related issues. But presumably the majority of people who have polio don't show those. So it's a 40%. It's a big increase, but presumably it's a big increase on a fairly small base.
Yes. Yeah.
So Franklin Delano Roosevelt presumably didn't have that problem. Well, one assumes maybe he did.
One assumes.
I mean,
I think he was. But on the other hand,
or was he a Churchillian figure that? No, we're jumping ahead. I want to come back to FDR and Churchill.
Stalin said there was only one person that he felt was his intellectual equal that he respected, and that was Roosevelt. And Stalin was a pretty funky character.
He was very funky. So one of the things I learned in your book is that there is physical differences in the brain between sociopaths and non-sociopaths. And so you describe the amygdala and the hippocampus and the thymalia or something. I got a little bit lost in the details in there. But just talk through that, because this is interesting. If I'm a sociopath, you could study my brain and you could see physical differences in my brain and somebody who wasn't a sociopath.
So that book, Evil Genes, was written 20 years ago. And since then, there's been really extraordinary leaps and bounds forward in our understanding of the brain and of a lot of psychological disorders. Kent Keel, in particular, has done some pretty remarkable studies. He developed a mobile fMRI laboratory where he could take it around to some of the penitentiaries and study the brains of psychopaths. And he found really there are some quite quantifiable differences in the operation of the paralimbic system. So it does seem there's differing functionality that is a pretty common signature amongst those with, a biological inclination towards psychopathic behavior.
So this is not something that can be fixed. If you are a sociopath, you are stuck.
At present, let me tell you, one experiment that they tried was to develop a summer camp for psychopathic kids to try to help, teach them how to have normal behavior. And what they found instead was that the psychopathic kids were teaching one another how to be better psychopaths. So from what I understand, that summer camp lasted 1 year, and that was it. It was one summer because it was worsening the very conditions that they had meant to resolve.
So they were teaching each other how to fake empathy, I guess, is what they would have been.
Amongst other things. And one, my worry is that we could study this and we can perhaps find ways to help those who are psychopaths. But what else might they also be finding that they can help people with? So
psychopaths have smaller amygdalas, smaller hippocampuses. If I'm reading that was what in the book is that still the view? Because you were talking about studying psychopaths in prison, but you also talk about successful psychopaths and unsuccessful psychopaths. So a successful psychopath is somebody who has the ability to control their actions sufficient to the point that they don't get caught. So presumably,
so they might not get studied.
they might not get studied, but they're still out there.
Exactly. So you could be cherry-picking the problematic ones that are very obvious and completely missing the population of. And again, this gets to that idea of we're not talking, when we're talking people who are nefarious, who are your boss and they're happy to steal credit for what you're doing or to, go to bed with your wife so they can brag on it with this kind of thing. This kind of person has there's something going on in their brain. How do you study this kind of Machiavellian personality? Part of the problem is you've got all these terms. You've got sociopath, psychopath, Machiavellian, personality.
Okay, I want to come to all those, but let's just for the moment I want to stand on a psychopath. So, one of the definitions in the book of a sociopath is psychopaths appear to be a special alien subset of humanity, glib, with shallow emotions and completely lacking in the ability to feel guilt or remorse. And there is a difference in terminology. You describe a sociopath as something that sociologists use the term sociopath, kind of leaning towards the sociopaths are created by nurture, and biologists use the term psychopaths. So we've said that psychopaths have a different brain structure, but if we were to meet a psychopath, or how would we actually define a psychopath? What is a psychopath? I mean, we throw the term around, but I want to know what are the characteristics, the internal characteristics of a psychopath? What's going on inside their head?
Remember that when I was writing this book, I was not focusing on psychopaths per se. What I was trying to do was delineate psychopaths so that I could better understand people who are Machiavellian.
But we've got to define sociopaths before we get to Machiavellians.
And at that time, to my mind, the only way to really quantify is to look inside people's brains and see how they operate differently.
Yep.
At that time, they were doing best guesses because they couldn't really look inside the brain. Now, if I were to go and look at the body of research now, I am seeing that they're starting to get a much better sense. But since I've been working in education, I have not followed in particular. So I couldn't say, well, okay, this is the differing function that a psychopath has. But you had to be aware, though, that there's different terms growing from different subject matter experts, and sometimes those are overlapping. For example, a sociopath and a psychopath, they grow. Are they
different terms for the same thing?
Sociopath implies that it grows from social. Like you grew up in a really bad environment, you ended up, doing some really bad things, but it was more because of how you were socialized. Psychopath implies it's more biological.
But I still want to come down to, you're the closest thing to an expert on the subject that I've had, Barbara, so I want to pin you down. What is going on in the head of a sociopath? Because if I'm dealing with another person who enjoys empathy or has empathy, I can kind of understand where they're coming from, I think. I'm told that a sociopath doesn't have empathy, but tell me what they do have. What are they interested in? What's their motivation? Is there 1,000 different types of sociopaths, and maybe the question is meaningless?
I suspect that there is, kind of a main signature which has to do with the paralimbic system, and I would have to go and look and see what the current literature is. All I know is that it could be a number of different things, but part of it just means that I don't feel myself the same like if I see you hurt, part of me, part of my brain actually reacts as if I had been equally hurt. Like if you, whacked your hand with a hammer, part of my brain would react with a bit of, as if I had been. But I don't believe that happens in a psychopath.
In the brain of a psychopath.
Why? I don't know. It could have to do with the very complex mirror neuron system.
But if that's the case, we associate, maybe incorrectly, sociopaths with sadism. So if I'm a sociopath and I see, as Chairman Mao did, you write in the book, he saw a child get injured and had no reaction. If I'm a sociopath and I see a child being injured and I don't have an emotional reaction to that or an empathetic reaction, if I see a child injured, presumably I would get no happiness from that either. Why is in our minds we associate sadism with sociopathic behavior, but is that right or is that wrong?
I'm sure that there are different, qualities. There's some psychopaths who just really could care less if you were hurt. There's others who are wired somehow in such a way that it's hooked into their dopamine pleasure reward system, and when you get hurt, it causes them to feel good.
That implies a degree of empathy. Miswired empathy. Empathy is the wrong word to describe that. Okay, so we've got kind of a working brief of psychopaths. Okay, but that's not the subject of your book. The subject of your book is a subset of disorder, Machiavellianism, I'm sure, and borderline personality disorder. So your sister presumably wasn't a sociopath, but you do imply that she had either borderline personality disorder or some Machiavellian traits. Are they the same, Machiavellianism and a borderline personality disorder, or how are they different?
Well, first, when I was looking for the term that some kind of technical term that meant a mean person, I finally found, Machiavellian personality as this is it. This is the description. That was the best I could find in the psychology literature. But then when I went, and there's thousands of papers at that time, but when I went to look and see, it's malignant narcissism is actually the technical term for this kind of Machiavellian behavior. So I went to, see through these thousands of papers what the scientific underpinnings were, and there were zero scientific underpinnings. There were no papers on malignant narcissism whatsoever. So when you ask, what's the overlap between Machiavellianism and, sociopathy or whatever, at the time I was writing this book, you could have said whatever you wanted because it was so ill-defined, and really there was no scientific literature whatsoever on this. Now you could do a word vector analysis and begin to have a better understanding of what that word, what those phrases actually mean. But even so, it would be interesting to see what the literature has to. But the bottom line for me, and what I got out of writing this book, is that some people are particularly those who are somewhat narcissistic, they are pre-wired to believe that whatever they themselves do is the best of all possible reasons. And that means if they lie, cheat, steal, kill somebody else, whatever, it's all for a good cause. So ultimately, it comes down to me to, that underpinning we have relating to our own ego, our narcissism, some of which is actually healthy to have, but that in some people takes a really eerie, dark path that allows them to justify anything.
So, so John McCoskey, we were talking about him before. Did he come up with the term dark triad? Such a great term.
It is, and it's very commonly used. I'm not for sure if he is the one, but he certainly has used it widely.
So, dark triad, Machiavellianism, narcissism, and psychopathy are interchangeable in normal samples, but they're not the same thing. Antisocial personality disorder, you got to have three of the traits or five of the traits. Doesn't conform to social norms, deceitful, impulsive, fails to plan ahead, irritability and prone to aggressiveness, reckless disregard for the safety of others, constant irresponsibility, lack of remorse. I've got a lot of those.
Yeah. But listen to you say that. You're actually honestly saying that you have those. A person who really has those often cannot honestly say what you just said.
When I was 20, because we were talking off before we came online about my background, which most listeners will be aware of. When I was 20, I had a lot of these traits, and I either don't have them now or I don't have them to the same extent. Does not conform to social norms. Big tick back then. Now, I still don't conform, but within a much more acceptable boundaries. Absolutely deceitful in my 20s. Just the worst. Now, some people may still argue that, but I don't think I am. Recklessly impulsive in my 20s. Still impulsive, but again, in a much more narrowly defined way. So all of the traits that I had in my 20s that led me to do the most reckless things, which destroyed personal relationships, upended the relations with my family and ended in a custodial sentence. I still have all of those traits, but they are directed in such a different fashion now. And so I'm really interested in and you were talking about some of your other relatives before. So when you're saying that some of these traits are biological and they can be triggered by, so you're talking about somebody who has borderline personality disorder, has the genetic traits that can lead to that. They are triggered by things that happen. So you're talking about a large percentage of people with these sorts of traits refer to abuse and stuff that happens in their past. So that can be triggered, but then those traits don't necessarily always last, or maybe the people who have them in their 20s, they just get older and their risk profile changes. What's happening to those people? Because there's a lot of people like me who did dumb stuff in their 20s, driven by a lot of these things, and then when we get to our 30s and 40s, calm down, get married, stop doing this stupid stuff.
My husband's one of them. So let me ask you this. When you were growing up, did you have a difficult childhood?
Not really.
And was your family a pretty good family?
Yeah, they were wonderful.
Okay. So I don't know if this is relevant or not, but the brain can put its metabolic energy during development into a couple of different pathways. Okay, let me back up a little bit. Why do we have two hemispheres? It's thought that, let's take a bird, for example. A bird has two jobs to be able to pass its gene along. It has to be able to focus and peck on something, and it has to be able to scan the horizon for, potential predators that could eat it. Yeah. So it has to do two diametrically opposite things. And it's thought that the two different hemispheres evolved, because vertebrates pretty much all have this same, set of conflicting things they have to do. Now, to be able to focus is one thing, and you can put your metabolic energy into executive circuits in order to be able to focus. Or a brain can put more of its metabolic energy during the developmental stage into, is something dangerous out there?
Yeah.
If it puts its metabolic energies into that latter, it is extremely difficult for that kind of person to be able to focus when they're young. They've got ADHD. They've got, they can't pay attention. They don't want to pay attention to you. And they're kind of more interested in anything else that's going on. Now, there are clear examples of, for example, Santiago Ramon y Cajal was, like you, an extremely problematic child. He was he fired a cannon into a gate and destroyed.
I like him already.
Yeah, he was kicked out of several elementary schools. He was just nothing but a problem. His teachers just were at their wits' ends. His parents were at their wits' end.
Yeah.
And now, here's how this got resolved for Santiago Ramon y Cajal. It would not probably work for you. But his father was a doctor who really wanted him to, so this was the 1860s. It was a bit different. So he took him out to a graveyard and they dug up some human bodies. And Santiago, troublemaker that he was, got really interested, of course, in anatomy and human bone structure and so forth. And the thing is, when you have real troubles concentrating, there is one hidden superpower, and that is if you inside yourself are able to find interest in something, not that somebody told you, but you yourself become interested, you can hyper-focus.
Yeah.
And this is what he did. He began hyper-focusing on, and he was like, I didn't learn math in school. I got to kind of learn math. And he became a doctor. Mm-hmm. And then he 3 times took a test to become a professor of anatomy. And failed the first, failed the second, passed the third, and eventually won the Nobel Prize for his remarkable abilities to see and understand human anatomy and neurons, and is now considered the father of modern neuroscience. And he always said, you can rewire your brain. I think if you are able to become conscious of, and this is the problem for many with borderline personality disorder, they always, they think it's someone else. It's not them. And it's hard for them to say, I need to make that change. It's not impossible, but the more certain you are that it's everywhere else and not yourself, the harder it becomes to make those changes.
So there's a stark difference between a psychopath and somebody with borderline personality disorder. So I'm understanding that correctly?
And I think that's the case, and that modern research would uphold that.
Right. So it would be difficult, probably impossible, particularly if, the physical aspects of the brain, like the amygdala and the hippocampus, are like you said, 11% smaller. You can't rewire that. So if you're a psychopath and you don't have empathy, then you're not going to be able to rewire that. But if you have borderline personality disorder, and we'll come to what the genetic traits of that are, then there is a possibility for somebody with that condition to rewire their brains.
Well, let's say that, remember, we're only saying a person is a psychopath if they've been caught. So that may be a subset of what real psychopaths are like. So there may not be as quantifiable a difference as you might think. But I think as long as a person, whatever diagnosis you give them, if they're unable to be self-reflective of their own, role and of the need to make changes within themselves, that's the real key right there. If they can't do that, they're not going to be able to make any changes. Whatever term you use, psychopath, sociopath, borderline personality, whatever. And there's lots of overlap in all of those.
Okay, so to push back a bit, because when I was reading the book and thinking about my own life and experiences, I saw a lot of people in their 20s engaged in activity that would tick the boxes for antisocial behavior. And I see a lot of the same people or same types of people in their 40s and 50s. And to me, a lot of what's changing is that they have gotten older and their risk profile has changed. Some of them have got they've got more to lose. They've got a house, they've got a family, they've got a job. As they've gotten older, some of them make choices that integrate them into society, and those people, they've got more to lose. Other people don't, and so they remain on the margins in the gangs and whatever it is. So is that, so maybe that's the question is why? Why do some people in their particularly mid to late 20s decide, you know what, I want to stop slinging drugs or whatever it is, and I'm now going to, I'll get this job, working on the road gang rather than the criminal gang. What are the trigger points that may, because if you make that, I'm making an assumption, but if you make the decision, I'm going to go and, even if it's a manual job, so as opposed to the guy who went on to win the Nobel Prize, a lot of the people in this situation don't have the ability to do that, but they have the ability to get a job, to learn a trade, to marry and start a family. Why do some people go down that path and other people continue permanently on the outsides of society?
I think that goes to the question of free will. And for me, yeah, I kind of go, that's above my pay grade.
You wrote the book. It is not.
But I also make
it. If not you, who?
I also make it clear it's a probabilistic thing. There will be thousands of tiny little pushes and pulls. Do you meet a woman who, who just actually understands you and who's really compassionate and who opens your mind to, thinking about others in ways you never would have? Or do you meet a woman who is, sort of troubled on her own and pushes you more? All of these pushes and pulls make
Roxana.
Yeah. Well, and she won. From an evolutionary perspective, her progeny were doing pretty well.
My suspicion is that young men, there is an evolutionary advantage to young men being reckless, and I blame women for this. Because
why not?
why not? Back into my inner misogyny. Women do seem to be attracted to men who take risks. And so men who take risks when they're younger there seems to be an evolutionary advantage for that. Older men who take risks, they're not there to look after their kids. There does seem to be a human pattern of young men acting recklessly and assuming they don't die out, older men not acting recklessly. And even people who are not borderline personality disorder and not sociopaths, they will still completely within the normal bounds of reality, they will be much more reckless when they're 20 than they are when they're 50. And I wonder whether we are potentially pathologizing the reckless stupidity of male testosterone.
Well, I would look at it completely differently. Okay, so I met my husband. I was working at the South Pole, and there was a guy there.
Great story.
And I will not say his name, although I remember it. But he marched in one night at about 2 o'clock in the morning, because I worked nights, and he took all the paperwork I was working on, following flights. He ripped it up. He threw, coffee in my face. He broke my pencils and just said, "Women should not even be here. This is just disgusting." And so, of course, I threw my cup of coffee and in his face, and he went and reported to the station manager that I had completely unprovoked thrown, hot coffee at him.
Gaslighting.
So my husband, there's a thing called packing at the South Pole. Packing means that you take a person and you take them outside and you pack their suit inside with the dirtiest, nastiest ice that you can possibly find. So when my husband-to-be heard about what had happened, all of a sudden there was a big crew led by my husband, and this guy found himself being packed, and he never bothered me again. Now, you tell me, you might say to me, "Oh, you're more interested in his, yen for dangerous behavior." No, what I'm interested in, this guy, he stands up he'll stand up for me. When I'm not strong enough to beat on somebody, he can get his crew, and he can do pretty well.
So stay with that. To completely segue in a different direction, but relying on that, Halifax would not have packed him. Churchill would have, right?
Chamberlain, you mean?
No. Churchill. Churchill said of Halifax.
Chamberlain would.
Yeah, Chamberlain's another story.
But Churchill, I like Churchill. What can I say? He was not Yeah.
But Churchill said of Halifax's virtues have done more harm in the world than the vices of hundreds of other people. Mm-hmm. Now, Halifax was an interesting guy because he wanted to do a peace deal with Germany. And when you go back, Halifax is so demonized now. And I think unfairly. I think Halifax was looking at the military reality of the world that existed in 1939, 1940, and made a rational decision that we can't win and wanted to do a deal. Churchill went in a completely different direction. And if I had been sitting there in 1940, I'm not so sure, everybody says, "Oh, yeah, we rally around Churchill." Not a lot of people did. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people, and I may well have, because you also talk about the trolley problem. Be clear, I would push the fat man. No, and I'm concerned.
There you go.
I am concerned that you say that is behaviour that is outside the norm. But the Churchill fits a lot of the antisocial criteria that's in the book. And so I want to talk about the evolutionary success of psychopaths and Machiavellians. But since we're talking about packing ice into reprobates, and we
I love how you phrase that.
We need people like Churchill. In some ways, Churchill and Hitler, although they're heading off in very different directions, I don't mean to compare them, but there are aspects of their unreasonableness and their unwillingness to compromise that is similar. And I don't believe Churchill was a sociopath, but he certainly had some of the traits that would fall into Machiavellianism, surely.
Oh, and Churchill was about as narcissistic as you could possibly come. But he went out, he listened to people. Hitler would never really do that. And Churchill learned a lot from his failures during World War I. And even when he strongly felt that some action should be taken, he would listen to his people. And if they had very good reasons, he would not go against his advisory group, which is...
That was tactics, though. No,
okay.
Strategically, because he made the comment at one point, a nation that loses can reemerge. A nation that surrenders is gone, right? He was prepared to lose. He would have not happily, but in his mind, Britain fighting and losing was a better outcome than surrender. So I disagree with you when you say he listened. He would listen once he had decided this is where we're going. We're going to take the hill. That was strategy. How we take the hill, you're right. But that there is, and I guess that's the difference between him and Hitler. Hitler overruled his generals all the time with catastrophic results.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to draw out, because in the last bits of the book, you talk about not the positive traits, but the why. One of the reasons why these people continue to exist is because potentially they provide a benefit not just to themselves but to the groups in which they live.
They always say you can tell the leaders because those are the ones with the arrows in their backs. And the reality is when you're leading, it can be a horrifically difficult thing. And you have to have a Teflon ego a lot of times. You look at Jensen Huang,
Sorry, who was that?
The leader of NVIDIA. He's got a pretty tough sense of self, and that's really why NVIDIA is what it is. Let's see, Steve Jobs did Apple, and his colleague said, if I had done Apple, it would have been a much nicer company, but we would have never had the Macintosh.
Yeah,
he was too nice.
And how would you define Stephen Jobs on a Machiavellian?
Oh, he was pretty borderline-y, as far as his
a border
behavior.
path.
Yeah, kind of.
Define border path.
Sort of someone who could be so malevolently and wantonly and gratuitously mean, going out of his way to hurt people, that you kind of almost wonder if there's a bit of psychopathy in him. But then on the other hand, for example, his son, he absolutely adored and doted on his son and really treated him very, very well, which is not to say he did that for his other children or family members. Yeah. So that's, to me, that's kind of a borderline-like behavior is you put some people on a pedestal and you treat them beautifully, and others you can do all sorts of nasty things to. But at the same time, he was able. I'm like, one of the worst things he did was go off and die on us when his next big project was going to be finding a way to get college textbooks to students for much less money.
That's because he wouldn't listen to advice. He wouldn't listen to his doctors, and he kept taking these stupid, not herbal remedies, eating fruit or such nonsense. You talk about the sun also shines on the wicked in your book, chapter 12. The Machiavellian may ruthlessly eliminate business units that need pruning others would have found too painful to undertake, or they may seize the opportunity others, perhaps with more compassionate concerns, may have shied away from. So that's where you were talking, the Wozniak, sufficiently self-consciously aware that he was not the person to lead, to put a dent in the universe. And likewise, the people around Churchill, knowing what he was like with all of his failings and personality disorders, saying that's the one we need. And yet with wisdom in 1945, they kicked him out. They re-elected him incomprehensibly, but they collectively, the British understood that he was not the man to lead them in peacetime, but he was the man to lead them in wartime. So we do, which is disconcerting because we need these people.
I would put it to you a different way, and that is that people, when your back's against the wall, you will do the right thing, what is actually called for. When your back is no longer against the wall, you don't have to do that. So there's a wonderful historian named Peter Turchin. He wrote a book called War and Peace and War. And it was about, it's how, for example, the Roman Empire, it really evolved and became so strong because it was facing antagonistic groups. In their case, all the Northern Europeans were, and so that caused the tribes in Italy to unite because they had to, because otherwise they could get overrun. And indeed, when the Roman Empire collapsed, it was overrun. But people, so you can almost see is like the ones that are the tribes near Rome, they're like, we hate those Romans. God, we just got, oh, wait a minute. There's something worse than the Romans. Let's kind of get together with them because we've got to fight against the,
bigger enemy.
And so when Churchill's enemies disappeared, they didn't need him anymore.
So if Marcus Aurelius had more of these negative traits, he would have strangled Commodus. That was the problem?
That might have been. It just doesn't it amaze you that one of the greatest thinkers in history could have a son that and he should have been able to see what his son was about and what he would do.
Well, because you write in the book, even at 12, somebody, this is talking about Commodus, famous from the Gladiator movies, but Marcus Aurelius wrote the Meditations, unbelievable leader. His son was an absolute monster. Ordered the slave or the servant who'd failed to heat the bathwater to correct, had him throw him in the furnace. Aurelius did the best that he could, but then. So here I want to the last 12 minutes, talk about what was Aurelius's wife's name?
Was it Flavia?
Faustina? Anyway, it doesn't matter. She was, so we're going to talk about the power of these Machiavellian individuals for their genes to survive. And we talk about Genghis Khan. Actually, you make a really interesting point about Genghis Khan, which is a bit shocking, that he demonstrated absolute, it's hard to diagnose somebody from this distance, but certainly he had some of these traits, border path traits. But then you describe he was a great ruler.
Yeah, I don't know he was a man of his time, so I don't know. No, I mean in the sense
he
that
was outside of all time. He created an empire. No, I don't think he was a man of the times.
And by that I mean killing, raping, stealing, knocking out entire cities. Yeah. That was pretty much par for the course back then.
On the scale? Maybe it's just an issue of scale. Okay. Right.
But, as they like to say, he clearly made love as well as war because his genes are
60 million people or something descended from him. And yet... Okay, so we're talking now about the ability of people with these dark traits to pass their genes on. And so we have, so there's two aspects I want to talk about this. You talk about Paris Hilton's mother. So terrible. You just talk about living people and just talk about throwing people under the bus. Talk about Paris Hilton's mother. This is a great story because there are so in a number of people say I'm a misogynist. You're terrible. All of these Rox. How do you say her name? Suleiman the Great's wife.
Oh, Roxolana.
Roxolana. So these are females who use Machiavellian behavior to make sure that their children assume power, and that's also true of Paris Hilton's mother in your telling.
So I think the thing that we often forget is if you have two people and one of them is willing to lie, cheat, steal, or otherwise connive, that other one is going to be the one who wins most of the time. And so we like to think that the good guys win, but that's just not necessarily the truth. And so, looking at Alzheimer's research, they did a massive study to see if there was kind of hanky-panky in some of the research results. Turns out that some of the top, best, most prestigious researchers in the whole field who guided tens of billions of dollars of research monies were there not necessarily because they always had great research results that they published. But evidence shows that there may well have been some hanky-panky in how they always got these wonderful research results. So the top leaders in the field, as it turned out, a number of them weren't there because they were so, terrific researchers, because they were the ones that were willing to play fast and loose with the facts.
I don't care how good you are as an Alzheimer's researcher, you're not going to get any more girls. I don't think that's an evolutionarily successful.
Oh, if I'm picking that, but
other strategies.
Oh no, that's where you're wrong. Where is the big money in research?
Pass.
Everybody is interested in Alzheimer's. Everybody, because it's such a. So if you're into research at all.
Yeah.
That's a really highly remunerative place where there's going to be lots of big bucks directed
so
that.
You can make stuff up and get good money.
Yep.
But there's two things going on. I can't remember where I read it now. I went looking for it this morning. I couldn't find it.
That's the story of my life.
I could have asked AI. I would have just made it up. That historically, because you talk about the people in, I think it's Alaska, and in a small group you can identify the person with negative traits and you can push them off the ice field. You talk about in Scotland there are more sociopaths in English jails and Scottish jails because in a small environment sociopaths are identifiable and we seem to have evolved ways of, just as there is an advantage to somebody who cheats, there is also an advantage to somebody who can detect cheaters. But in an urban environment, it's harder to spot these people. So there's kind of two things happening. In an earlier time, we were much more willing to kill, either judicially or extrajudicially, people we would now consider to be sociopaths. We don't do that as much anymore. Historically, your successful sociopaths, the people who don't get caught, the Slobodan Milosevic types, the Chairman Maos, the Mao Zedongs. Mao Zedong was a bad example. Did he have a lot of children? He certainly had a lot of, he became infertile, I think, relatively early, but that was the issue. So there is a demographic shift potentially where are we in an environment now in the kind of a welfare society where a highly successful sociopath isn't going to have the huge number of children they would have had in the past, Elon Musk notwithstanding, but your unsuccessful sociopaths in the kind of welfare state that we have now may be more successful at having children. We don't push people off the ice field as much as we used to.
Mm-hmm. I think that's definitely possible. So,
right.
It could be that, but I do think it's relatively small percentages we're talking about as far as shifts in, and there's probably much more major things happening, within societies because of AI and our shift in who has power, who is going to be able to reproduce, and so forth.
Nobody's reproducing, Barbara.
A big problem now is that, there's this demographic black hole that is occurring in. So, all I can say is I can't affect the outcome, so I just keep watching what's going on.
Well, if 2% of the population is borderline, is that right? 2% were borderline personality disorders?
Something like that.
How many are sociopaths? Do we know?
I think it was, it's something on the same order, but that percentage of 2% might be overlapping between the two. I would say that when I'm meeting someone, there's like a 5% chance that I should probably be really careful when I'm trusting them. But that does not happen with you, so maybe you're really good.
Maybe I'm so good. I've got past your defenses. But if we are in an environment where, because the other thing I was thinking about in the book, that historically the Roxanas, the Faustinas, the Kahns were very good at having a lot of children. So those were the successful sociopaths. Now the successful sociopaths are working for Enron, and
and some non-governmental agencies.
Yeah, non-government, and you think of people like Donald Trump, right? He's had 5 children or something. 500 years ago, he might have had 20. So there is a shift in that there is a greater ability for substandard men like me to get women. Which is yay, great.
I think you are underestimating yourself. So,
I only tricked one woman. That's all I needed to do, and then not screw it up. She doesn't listen to this podcast, so I'm fine. But now historically, the unsuccessful psychopaths we would have strung up at Tyburn. We don't do that now. And so now I'm wondering whether the unsuccessful sociopaths and unsuccessful borderline personality disorder individuals, we have built a system that rewards those people in terms of fertility, and we are punishing the successful sociopaths relative to what we've done in the past. And you combine that with demographic decline, and I won't be around to see the outcome, but it may not be pretty.
Well, but we could flip this on its head and say, back in the day, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 years ago, the bad guys won. There was no rule of law. It was how strong are you? How good are you at, offing people and fooling them and so forth. So, you could equally make the case that back in the day, it was more probable to have children if you were, one of these.
As you talk about the people in Alaska and in the African savannah, they had ways of dealing with people like that.
Who were really psychopathic.
Yeah, they would get left on the ice accidentally, and even in a relatively recent history, we would in the local assizes and the local lords, whatever, would just string people up if they were troublemakers, and we don't do that anymore. And it's an interesting experiment. And if the number of borderline personality individuals are relatively small, and they have an outsized impact, then if we go from 2% to 4%, that's a big shift. And if you're working and our civilization works because we are a high trust society, if that shifts potentially, because the other thing was that Richard Dawkins, he was talking about when you got a population of cheaters and non-cheaters, there is an equilibrium. Whereas if the number of cheaters gets too high, then the society it kind of collapses. So it's urban societies. Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know where I'm going with this, but
all I know is it's easy to have a way outsized influence on society with today's social media. If you are a nefarious character, you will play well with the masses.
I've seen that happen. All right, we're at just over the hour. Dr. Oakley, thank you so much for coming to New Zealand. It's been, I went to one of your talks talking about education, which is really interesting. But for me, look, I love the dark triad stuff. So Barbara, thank you for spending an hour with me this morning.
Oh, it's been my pleasure.
Okay, thank you. We're done.